Why nothing you've tried seems to be working. I'm Ben Oofana, completing another in-depth article, this one even more so by my standards, so I'll definitely be reading from the article itself. For many years, I've heard people say they've tried everything: therapy, workshops, supplements, books, journaling, meditation apps, breath work, plant medicines, affirmations, tapping therapies, and a wide range of other practices and therapeutic interventions. On one hand, I hear their anguish, frustration, exhaustion, and a growing sense of resignation. I genuinely feel for these individuals, yet at the same time, I can't help but notice that many people lack the commitment, consistency, and willingness to face the issues that need to be addressed, particularly when doing so involves discomfort. In this article, I'll be breaking down why so many people, article and video, why so many people are not experiencing significant change despite all the information, practices, and therapeutic interventions now available, and what it truly takes to heal and create meaningful transformation in our lives. In our modern day world, we have very few real models of transformation. Most people have no meaningful point of reference for what it actually looks like to profoundly heal and fundamentally change as a human being. We live in a culture saturated with information, yet starving for wisdom, embodiment, and genuine transformation. For thousands of years, those who attained mastery in the ancient spiritual traditions understood that transformation required far more than insight alone. It required disciplined practice, direct experience, mentorship, deep introspection, sustained effort, and methods specifically designed to help one work constructively with their suffering, trauma, fear, attachment, emotional pain, and the limitations of the conditioned mind. Today, many people are filling their heads with endless amounts of information, from podcasts, books, self-help videos, and other motivational content, along with psychological concepts and therapeutic language. Intellectually, they understand why they're suffering and can often articulate the dysfunctional patterns they're enacting, their trauma, their attachment wounds, yet very little actually changes. That's because intellectual insight alone rarely transforms us. Insight may help us understand our dysfunction conceptually, but understanding something intellectually is not the same as digesting it emotionally, embodying it, or fundamentally transforming the way we relate to ourselves, other people, and life itself. Much of what people call healing never goes beyond insight. Many are accumulating information while the fear, grief, insecurity, unresolved trauma, and other deeply ingrained patterns held within their bodies remain largely untouched. As a result, they continue thinking, feeling, reacting, choosing, attaching, and suffering in many of the same ways they always have, despite all the books they've read, podcasts they've listened to, or other therapeutic concepts they've learned. Real transformation requires far more. It requires learning to work directly and constructively with our lived experience, emotional responses, conditioning, trauma, and other wounded parts of ourselves that continue shaping our lives. And that process is often far more demanding, uncomfortable, and time-intensive than most people realize. Another reason so many people fail to experience meaningful change is inconsistency. Modern life steadily conditions people toward distraction, fragmentation, and superficial engagement. From smartphones and short-form videos to endless scrolling, digital overstimulation continually trains their attention to jump from one thing to the next. Our dopamine reward systems are constantly being stimulated, making it increasingly difficult for people to sustain focus, tolerate discomfort, or engage deeply with anything for extended periods of time. As a result, many people approach healing the same way they approach digital content: briefly, inconsistently, and without sustained engagement. They dabble in meditation practices and therapeutic interventions, journal intermittently, listen to a few podcasts, read a book, attend a workshop, then quickly move on to the next thing before anything has had sufficient time to take root and transform them. Their efforts become fragmented, scattered across dozens of practices, ideas, and interventions without ever engaging deeply enough with any one approach for meaningful transformation to occur. Yet, throughout much of human history, particularly within many ancient spiritual traditions in places like China, India, and among other ancient traditional cultures, those who underwent profound transformation often did hours of intensive daily practice over many years. Transformation was understood to be an ongoing process, requiring discipline, consistency, repetition, patience, and sustained engagement. And in many ways, that understanding has largely been lost in our modern day world. Many people are also profoundly disconnected from their own bodies. They live almost entirely in their heads, caught in a seemingly never-ending cycle of obsessive thinking, analyzing, consuming information, worrying, fantasizing, distracting themselves, and reacting to external stimulation while remaining largely disconnected from what they are actually feeling internally. Many people are not all that aware of the stress and tension held within their own bodies, yet trauma, stress, the imprints of lived experience, and the emotional responses tied to them continue to accumulate. As a result, many lose touch with their emotions, instincts, intuition, and other subtle internal signals arising from within. This is one reason intellectual insight alone so often fails to produce meaningful change. People often understand themselves conceptually while remaining disconnected from the parts of themselves that actually need healing. Real transformation requires developing the capacity to remain present with our thoughts, emotions, and bodily experience. It requires learning how to reconnect with the body and the parts of ourselves that are wounded and vulnerable rather than continually trying to escape from them. One of the greatest barriers to healing and transformation is the tendency to avoid painful emotions rather than fully experiencing and working constructively with them. Many people spend enormous amounts of time attempting to escape from themselves. They distract and numb themselves, disconnect from their bodies, suppress their emotions, stay constantly stimulated, or remain almost entirely externally focused, doing almost anything to avoid directly experiencing the pain, fear, grief, loneliness, insecurity, anger, shame, and other emotional discomfort held within. But our lived experiences and emotional responses need to be digested. What we fail to digest does not simply disappear. It remains within the body, continuing to shape the way we think, feel, perceive of ourselves, and relate to others. Over time, this unresolved emotional residue reinforces many of the same dysfunctional patterns that have caused us so much suffering, including the same or similar unhealthy relational dynamics, along with many of the same fears, insecurities, and other distressing emotions. And for many of us, what remains unresolved internally eventually expresses itself physically as some form of tension, stagnation, exhaustion, distress, imbalance, or illness. Real healing requires learning how to stay present with ourselves long enough to actually feel and digest what we have spent much of our lives trying to avoid. One of the things most people fail to understand is that their bodies hold on to the impressions of the lived experiences and emotions they fail to digest. Many people assume that simply talking about an experience, understanding it intellectually, or distracting themselves long enough means that they have moved past it. But the imprints of undigested lived experience, along with the emotions tied to it, often continue living within the body long after the conscious mind believes it has moved on. As a result, people continue carrying unresolved layers of grief, fear, heartbreak, humiliation, resentment, anger, abandonment, and stress, along with the imprints of trauma and other adverse lived experiences within themselves for years and often decades. And because these experiences remain unresolved, internally they continue shaping perception, behavior, emotional reactions, attachment patterns, and the kinds of situations and relationships people repeatedly find themselves drawn into. This is one of the primary reasons so many people continue repeating the same painful patterns, despite believing they have already done so much work on themselves. Another major reason many people fail to experience meaningful change is they attempt to heal while continuing to live in ways that continually reinforce the very problems they are trying to overcome. Many people are attempting to heal while continually returning to the same environments, dynamics, and relationships that re-traumatize them. They may intellectually understand the patterns they've been enacting, yet continue surrounding themselves with people and situations that reinforce fear, emotional instability, and self-abandonment, chronic stress, or unhealthy attachment dynamics. Under these conditions, meaningful change is highly unlikely. Many people remain chronically overstimulated, sleep-deprived, overworked, emotionally overwhelmed, sedentary, disconnected from their bodies, immersed in digital media, entangled in unhealthy relational dynamics, and spend most of their time externally focused. Yet, at the same time, they hope a supplement, podcast, meditation app, therapy session, or occasional practice will somehow fundamentally transform their lives. Healing does not occur in isolation from the way we live. The environments we spend time in, our relational dynamics, sleep and dietary habits, media consumption, and habitual patterns of thinking all profoundly shape our mental, emotional, and physical well-being. To truly transform ourselves, it requires significant effort, along with meaningful changes in the way we live, what we consume, the kinds of people we surround ourselves with, and how we relate to ourselves on a daily basis. Without changing the conditions continually reinforcing our dysfunction, we're likely to remain stuck in the same cycles no matter how much information or therapeutic insight we accumulate. Many people are also attempting to heal while living in a near constant state of physiological stress. They are constantly overstimulated, emotionally overwhelmed, anxious, hypervigilant, mentally scattered, exhausted, or stuck in chronic states of tension and survival. Their minds rarely settle, and their bodies rarely relax. They seldom, if ever, experience genuine stillness, silence, rest, or emotional safety. In this state, it becomes extraordinarily difficult to digest their lived experiences and emotional responses, remain present, think clearly, and tolerate discomfort, all of which are necessary to facilitate true healing and transformation. Many aspects of modern-day life contribute to this condition. Endless stimulation, digital overload, chronic stress, emotional suppression, unresolved trauma, financial pressure, social isolation, and unhealthy lifestyles all make it difficult for people to slow down and engage constructively with their lived experience. Learning how to utilize our own internal resources to facilitate calm, stability, healthier functioning, and self-awareness is an essential part of genuine healing. While solitude, introspection, and personal responsibility are all important, many aspects of healing and transformation cannot be done entirely on our own. Human beings are relational by nature. Much of our emotional wounding occurred in relationship, and many aspects of healing also occur through relationship, guidance, support, therapeutic intervention, and the kinds of lived experiences that nourish us. One of the problems with attempting to heal entirely on our own is that we are often too identified with our own patterns, conditioning, emotional reactions, blind spots, and ways of perceiving ourselves and the world to clearly see what is actually happening. Many people remain trapped inside the same dysfunctional cycles for years while believing they are working on themselves. Yet, left entirely to themselves, they often continue reinforcing the same distorted perceptions, fears, and habitual ways of feeling, along with the same patterns of avoidance, contraction, dysfunctional relational dynamics, and other maladaptive coping strategies. This is one reason why, throughout much of human history, deep transformation was rarely approached as an entirely solitary process. In many ancient spiritual traditions, there was often mentorship, guidance, discipline, accountability, and the support of individuals who had already undergone profound transformation themselves. At times, we need someone capable of helping us see what we cannot yet fully see ourselves. We may need guidance when we become emotionally overwhelmed, avoidant, inconsistent, discouraged, confused, are trapped in the same repetitive cycles. We need to be making consistent use of the most effective practices and therapeutic interventions, whether skilled body work, sessions with gifted healers, or other forms of support capable of facilitating healing on levels we may not be able to fully bring about on our own. And while no one can do the parts of the healing process that are ultimately our own responsibility, many people remain stuck far longer than necessary because they continue trying to navigate extraordinarily complex emotional, psychological, physiological, and relational issues entirely on their own. Another major reason many people fail to experience meaningful change is that they are often unwilling to genuinely test out approaches that fall outside of what feels familiar or comfortable. Over the years, while I was offering weekly classes, there were many instances in which people showed up in the midst of devastating breakups, overwhelmed by anxiety and other distressing emotions, or suffering from digestive disorders, and a wide range of other physiological issues. And based on my experience working with thousands of people over the years, I knew many of these individuals would heal, become far more resilient, and undergo profound transformation if they were to work with me individually. Yet some would hesitate, saying, "I'll think about it." And what often happened is I never saw or heard from them again, which is sad because I also know from firsthand experience working with so many people that these issues are never going to resolve on their own without effective intervention. In some instances, I later encountered these same individuals and found them still struggling with many of the same issues months and even years later, issues that would have resolved had they recognized and taken advantage of the opportunity being presented to them. There were also many instances in which I did start working with someone. Again, they were suffering as a result of issues such as those I described earlier, yet they would only do one or a few sessions, and when I explained the importance of following through and giving the process the opportunity to actually work, they would say, "Well, let me see how I'm feeling," while others would simply disappear. Healing can, in some instances, entail some really hard work, and some discontinue because they're simply not willing to deal with the emotions that surface or face the issues that need to be dealt with. Others are just not willing to make the investment in themselves and do what it takes to facilitate their healing. Real transformation requires an openness and willingness to do whatever it takes. We need to initially be open to testing out different practices and therapeutic interventions to determine what is actually going to affect the desired change. At the same time, no single therapeutic intervention is capable of addressing every issue. Whenever I felt another modality, practitioner, or resource would better serve someone's needs, I would often make those recommendations. Sometimes the sessions I was doing with the person were genuinely helping, yet I could see that incorporating other forms of support would allow us to make much greater progress. This might include dietary changes, supplements, additional practices, bodywork, or other therapeutic interventions. We also need to be consistent and thorough. I've often said to people who were struggling with many of the issues described throughout this article and who were being inconsistent or sitting on the fence, even if you had access to the most effective supplements or medicinal herbs for addressing a particular condition, what do you honestly think is going to happen if you only take them once or a few times? Very little. Yet, this is how many people approach healing. As is often the case, they possess a very limited understanding or awareness of themselves and what is actually contributing to their suffering. Yet, many don't listen or follow instructions. They're flaky, inconsistent, trying out practices or therapeutic interventions and stopping before giving themselves the opportunity to experience the results they initially said they wanted. Yet, over the years, I've learned never to assume who will and won't heal and undergo profound transformation. The people who make the greatest progress are often not the ones who seem to understand the most initially, but those who remain open, consistent, and willing to engage fully with the process. At times when people were being inconsistent, hesitant, or unwilling to fully commit themselves to the process of healing, I've said, for many years, I trained with a traditional Native American doctor and a master from China. When it came to what they were teaching me, I listened carefully and I followed instructions. Throughout those many years of training, I came to understand that real transformation required discipline, consistency, repetition, patience, and sustained engagement over extended periods of time. Because of this training, along with my work with thousands of people over the years, many struggling with issues very similar to your own, I have also come to understand that those who remained inconsistent, resistant, avoidant, or unwilling to do what was necessary to truly heal often continue to struggle with the same debilitating emotional wounds and physiological issues, often remaining trapped in the same destructive cycles for years. Having spent so much of their lives numbing to their emotions and disconnecting from their bodies, many are carrying a great deal of armor and stagnation and may not feel that much during the initial sessions. Yet, with each successive session, more of that armor and stagnation dissolves and is cleared from the body. By the fifth or sixth session, the body becomes far more responsive. And this is one of the reasons I generally encourage people to do at least 10 sessions. It's through this consistency that people thoroughly digest the impressions of past trauma and adversity, along with the backlog of accumulated emotions, the physiological issues they came seeking help for heal, and an entirely new and much healthier foundation takes shape. And those who truly listened follow through with the individual sessions and incorporated the practices I taught them into their lives, healed and truly transformed themselves. When the traumas of my childhood and adolescence resurfaced in my mid-20s, and I found myself caught in a painful series of reenactments in my attempts to form intimate relationships, I was initially at a complete loss as to what to do. At first, I reached out to a psychotherapist I knew from the community I was living in. Psychotherapy was extraordinarily helpful in that it enabled me to gain an intellectual understanding of my own traumatic wounding and the dysfunctional dynamics I was caught up in. Yet at the same time, I could also feel that it was not actually facilitating the deeper healing of the trauma itself. And I found myself continuing to reenact many of the same dysfunctional relational dynamics. Instinctively, I began breathing from the depths of the all-consuming and at times excruciatingly painful emotions that were surfacing within me. And as I learned to work effectively with these emotions, I could feel that it was activating my own body and mind's innate healing intelligence. Yet, eventually, I also began to feel the limits of what I was able to do entirely on my own. Determined to do whatever it took to heal, I began exploring any therapeutic intervention that seemed promising. Of all of the more commonly available therapeutic interventions, deep tissue bodywork was among the most powerful. It helped me free up much of the trauma and emotional residue held within my body. And once these emotions surfaced, I would work with them directly by continuing to breathe softly and deeply, while fully immersing my awareness in the depths of what I was feeling. Yet even then, I still sensed that there were deeper levels of healing taking place through other therapeutic interventions. Of all the therapeutic interventions I've experienced over the years, the sessions I did with gifted healers and the Vision Quest, a traditional Native American practice involving fasting 4 days and nights, alone in the mountains without food and water, have been the most powerful. Over the years, I've had the opportunity to work with a number of gifted healers, and during these sessions, I could feel that something much deeper was occurring within me. I could feel the trauma I had been carrying being diffused and digested in ways I had not previously experienced. The problem is that there are very few people working on this level in the modern day world. Around the time I turned 30, I began feeling a strong pull to return to the Wichita Mountains to go on the Vision Quest, and I have continued returning every spring and fall since that time. During these Vision Quests, I have often felt an extraordinarily powerful presence descending into my body. And as this was happening, I could feel this presence working within me, helping me to digest trauma going all the way back to early childhood, as well as more recent adversity I was living through at the time, transforming it into fuel for growth while simultaneously creating a much stronger foundation within me. Having done so much meditation, intensive practice, therapeutic work, and so many Vision Quests over the years, I gradually became highly empathic, which made me extraordinarily sensitive to what people are carrying internally. I can often see and feel the trauma and undigested emotional residue held within, as well as the ways in which people have become disconnected from the wounded parts of themselves and their own bodies. I can see how suffering and illness express themselves physically, emotionally, and energetically within the individual. And at the same time, I can often sense the strengths, capacities, and healing potential they possess as well. While many commonly available therapeutic interventions have significant benefits, I can also see their limitations. In many instances, I still see and feel the unresolved trauma and the emotional residue people continue carrying within themselves, along with the disconnection and lack of embodiment that persists despite years of effort. Many improve to a certain extent, yet often remain wounded, emotionally restricted, disconnected from their bodies, and operating with only a fraction of their full capacity. Indigenous healers and interventions such as the Vision Quest are capable of facilitating healing on levels where many modern therapeutic interventions fall short. Having trained with my mentor Horace and worked with other Indigenous healers over the years, I've witnessed many instances in which an extraordinarily powerful presence worked through them to facilitate healing on levels that are not possible through more conventional therapeutic approaches. I've witnessed profound transformation taking place physically, emotionally, and psychologically as people heal from long-standing and deeply ingrained trauma, become far more embodied and resilient, and emerge from extraordinarily difficult periods of adversity with a much stronger foundation within themselves. I've also witnessed those who have experienced this form of healing show significant improvement with the wide range of physiological conditions, including stroke, heart disease, digestive disorders such as ulcerative colitis, and injuries sustained through automobile accidents. I've repeatedly seen trauma, shock, stagnant emotional residue, fear, grief, and other highly charged emotions diffused and digested in ways that allowed many of these same people to become much lighter, more resourceful, emotionally stable, and more deeply connected to themselves. Some aspects of healing I have only seen facilitated through intensive processes such as the Vision Quest or through working with indigenous healers and other individuals possessing similar capacities. Having trained with a traditional Native American doctor and gone through so many vision quests over the years, I too work as a conduit, much as indigenous healers have done for centuries, and am able to facilitate healing on these deeper levels. Healing is possible. From my own experience and from witnessing and helping to facilitate the process for many others, I know this to be true. No matter how long you have struggled, how much pain you have carried, or how impossible change may have sometimes seemed, there is a path forward.